Today marks the official beginning of parent and family orientation here at CMC for our class of 26 and our transfer students. And we are so excited. We are just about 2 weeks away from move-in for our first years. And in the past, we've done these sessions during the move-in day. We have 3 sessions that we're offering here virtually, but sort of found that the day was just so packed. It was kind of a whirlwind and frankly, a little difficult to ingest all of this information in one day when frankly, it is an emotional, busy, kind of wild time for us parents. So when we had the pandemic and found ourselves on Zoom all the time, we decided to just continue doing these 3 sessions on Zoom. So hopefully you're good with that. I think that it's a good way to kind of more slowly get the info. And today we are lucky to be joined by Diana DT Graves. She does go by DT. She is going to be talking about student well-being and success and just the many resources that students here at CMC can utilize for both mental and physical health and well-being. DT is from the class of 98. She was a biology major. And I think, am I right to say a 3-sport athlete? Could have been, yes. Hall of Fame athlete. She was an RA, I think maybe the head RA, and sort of just did it all on campus. And we're so very, very lucky to have her here with her wealth of information and history from the college. And she's such an incredible resource for our students. So I will go ahead now and turn it to DT. And then of course, if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put those in the chat. We will be addressing any of your questions, or you can also send them privately to me so we can go over them. DT, right, turn it to you.
Awesome, thank you so much. Jeannie, I actually do have a couple slides to share. If you want to enable slide share, I'll do that in just a moment, but welcome to everybody. Great to see all of you on the screen. Our team, along with a number of our colleagues across the college, including admissions and the Dean of the Faculty's Office and others, have been calling all of our students individually before they arrive. So hopefully your student has received a call, and if not, that should be coming this week. But the whole point of that is just to get to know folks a little bit, make sure that everybody feels connected. It's that, I think that sense of connection is the thing that has students the most nervous, right, about going to college. Like, what is it going to look like? Am I going to find friends? Am I going to find my people? And that's what this presentation is really sort of all about. So let me get us going here. Okay, can I get a thumbs up if you can see health and well-being? Beautiful. Okay, perfect. So this presentation, we have a few different goals. I want to just introduce my colleagues that are on the call with me. So Jess Nielsen is our Senior Assistant Dean for Mental Health and Health Promotion. Jess, can you wave? Thank you. Also have Sharon Basso on the call. Sharon is our Vice President for Student Affairs and oversees this entire party. She's amazing. Sharon waving. And then Lynn Hughes, who is our administrative coordinator. And Lynn seriously knows everything, but she has a special expertise in student health insurance plan. And so we wanted to make sure Lynn was on the call in case anybody has some specific questions about that particular point. What we're hoping to accomplish within the next 40 minutes to an hour is to really give you a better sense of what this transition is going to look like, help you to have an idea of what you can be doing as a parent to kind of support your students' goals and to make this transition in a way that keeps both you and them healthy. We'll talk a little bit about the partnership with our office and parents, hopefully introduce you to some important resources at the college. And then finally, we'll make sure there's plenty of time to do some Q&A to answer any questions that you might have. So your students are coming to Claremont McKenna, but of course, they're also coming to the Claremont Colleges. And so on the screen are some of the resources that we share with the entire consortium. The experience of our first year students in this regard is really important because they don't always walk in the door ready to just use resources. They are in the middle of a big transition. And so what we want to do is familiarize them with all of these things, but we also want you to know that these are here. So when your student calls and they're, maybe really homesick, or they're having a difficult time accessing their accommodations, or Maybe they are, a student who identifies as queer and they haven't quite found their resource group. These all exist. And so you can remind them, hey, think back to orientation. Are there some resources that you can dial into? And if there's any message I want you walking away from this presentation with, it's that the Dean of Students office is here to assist. So if you remember nothing else, remind your student, go by the Dean of Students office and they can help you figure this out. If we don't have the resource, we know where to connect them in. All right, so what is this transition going to look like? First and foremost, we have residential life. So for many of our students, this will be the first time that they've had to live with another person in their room, sharing space with others, doing their own laundry, getting along with people, managing different levels of noise, thinking about studying in places that are not their room or that is their room. There's a lot of elements to that. At the same time, they're going to be managing their own finances. They're going to be doing their own shopping, scheduling their own appointments, doing their own paperwork, contacting offices, really like having to think even about things that seem pretty straightforward, right? So waking up on their own, getting their meals, managing medication regimens, potentially that they haven't had to have full oversight over in the past. And some will just miss home, right? Family, friends, pets. And for some people, that comes a little bit unexpectedly. So we have built kind of a support system around all of those experiences. In addition to the residential life, they'll be adjusting to some of the academic elements. Your student will likely have to read more, study more, and complete more work in a semester than they've had to do in the past. I think the biggest change is that they're in class far less than they used to be. So, you might on a Monday and Wednesday have 2 classes, and similarly on Tuesday, Thursday. Every student here takes 4 classes, more or less. You can do a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on your situation. But for the most part, people are taking 4 courses. That leaves a lot of not downtime exactly, but unscheduled time. And so part of what we work with students on is establishing really good time management skills, organizational skills, thinking about what they might do with some of the in-between times so that they're not just, finding themselves at the end of the day overwhelmed with the amount of work that they have to do. We also just want to acknowledge that college assignments generally require a really different form of intellectual engagement. They're capable of doing that work, but they probably haven't been pressed as strongly as they will by our faculty to think about why they believe what they believe. How do they arrive at that conclusion in their paper? How do they think about what success in an academic environment like this looks like? All of your students have been near the top of their class all the way through school. And so when you get into an environment where everybody has kind of been at that level, there's a little bit of recalibration. And what we try to encourage our students to do is not thinking about clamoring their way to the top anymore. Like that is over and done with. What we're here to do now is really think about what is it that gives your student that sense of like intellectual purpose. What brings meaning to their life? What do they get fired up about? What do they want to do with their place in the world? And that can be a little bit daunting. So we have a lot of resources around academic success, tutors, success coaches, centers of writing and public discourse, and quantitative computing. And we'll go into those a little bit more, both in this presentation and also orientation with all of our students, so they have an idea how to access those types of things. The final transition is another big one, and this is really around social life and co-curricular opportunities. So are they sleeping enough? Are they thinking about nutrition? We have this all you care to eat buffet 3 times a day. Do they know what to do with that? Are they able to find food that really works for them and helps them feel fueled? We have a lot of clubs and organizations, and we want to work with our students to help them think about what do they want to get involved in and why. We really want to help them not overcommit. And that is a pretty typical thing of students that have achieved at this level. It's this idea that they can get in there and there's so many opportunities, they kind of want to snatch them all up. And so we talk a lot with them and with our student leaders about helping our first year students think about why do they want to get involved in a certain thing? What is kind of that skill set or that relaxation element that they're trying to draw in from that experience? and then helping them, again, make meaning from it once they're involved. If you are able to, in the next couple of weeks before your students head to campus, this is a really good time to revisit some of those conversations you likely had with your students at the start or the middle of high school. So thinking about safety, you know, reminding them that they have a lot of agency in protecting themselves, as far as things like, you know, walking with other people when they're on campus. We have an escort service to make sure that anybody, you know, maybe who's coming back from the library late at night can just quickly place a call and have one of our public safety officers walk them back. Thinking about good decisions around sex, around alcohol, around drug use, and just thinking about, again, managing their time in a way that doesn't compromise their entire life. Sometimes those conversations, you know, we remember, I have a 16 and a 17-year-old, those conversations can be a little bit awkward, but they are necessary and your students are actually listening. And I think at this point, they're really primed to hear those messages again, because as much as they may feel they've got this whole thing under control, I can guarantee you there's a little bit of question underneath that exterior that's sort of like, gosh, I hope I have this under control. So, okay, what does all of this mean then in terms of their overall well-being? So at CMC, we really try to think about wellness, well-being, from a very holistic and inclusive standpoint. So on the screen, you'll see a diagram, a chart that really shows how we focus on the student and their overall sense of well-being. What does the context of this transition look like and feel like for them? But then we're also thinking about how does that then translate into relationships within the college? Might be their roommate, might be their WO group, might be their people in their classes. What does it mean to be a part of this Claremont community? And then what does that mean in general to think more about your role in society? And these are, you know, big frameworks. It's a lot to kind of think about. And so we have developed a whole model around interaction that helps our students build the tools to think about these things, both in isolation and collectively. So, for example, we might have a student come in who is struggling in a class. And one approach to that would be to talk to them only about how they are approaching that class. So we might think about, you know, procrastination. We might think about, do they, are they reading a text, for example, in such a way that they're able to tease out the most important concepts, or are they getting overwhelmed just by the volume? Those are all really important. But in that same conversation, we're also going to be talking to them about whether or not they're sleeping. How are things going with their roommate? Have they maintained connection with their family? Some of our students will come in with things that are, you know, pre-diagnosed. Maybe they've struggled with ADHD in the past, or other types of learning differences, where we want to make sure that that continuity of care and that they have all the tools to kind of manage them, because sometimes those things manifest differently in college than they did in high school. And so we're trying to have a conversation and, again, direct them and connect them with resources that balance out that full package. So we have a lot of resources that support that, and I'm going to turn it over to Jess Nielsen now to talk a little bit more about what some of those are.
Awesome. Thank you, DT. So I'm going to run through a couple of the like health and wellness resources on campus, as well as, you know, things that we do within our office. And first two that I'm going to highlight are student health services and our counseling and psychological services center. And so these two centers that I'm going to talk about are part of the consortium. So they are available and accessible by all students that attend the both 5 undergrad and 2 graduate schools. Student health services is open Monday through Friday for students, and they are really available for kind of your lower level illnesses, things that pop up. So if you have a cold or you get the flu, or if you're just not feeling too great, student health services, we'll call it SHS often here on campus. It's a really great first stop for students. They do a handful of tests and screenings. I won't run through all of them, but you can see some of them on the screen. So they'll do basic labs, basic vision, audio screenings. They will test for strep. They do confidential HIV testing, to name a few. Next slide. They also will prescribe some limited medications, and they provide physical exams for students. So one thing to note, I was talking with a student the other day who wasn't able to get in to see their physician to get all their paperwork filled out, for the incoming student physical, and SHS can do those, during I believe that first week of orientation or first week of school, if your student has to drive many hours, for example, to get to the doctor, or just can't get that in. So that is something just to note, for the coming weeks. They also do very limited x-rays and labs, minor surgeries like suturing, suture removals, and tons of sexual health and family planning options. So again, they do pregnancy tests, they do HIV tests, they can prescribe emergency contraception. Annuals for our female students are able to be had at SHS. And we'll talk a little bit more in just a second about after hours support. I'm going to run through 7C Health just a little bit later, but just keep that in your pocket. Student health insurance plan. So all students are automatically enrolled in the Aetna student health insurance plan, which we like to call SHIP, Aetna SHIP. Again, Lynn will be available to answer any questions that you might have about this. Students, though, and many of your students may have already chosen to waive out of SHIP. So if they are using their own, personal or family health insurance that meets certain criteria, they will not then ultimately be enrolled in SHIP. Coverage runs started August 1st for your students and will run through next July 31st. And just a note on this, for students on SHIP who, if they try to go to health services or the counseling center after hours, right? So if those centers are closed, or if they are referred off campus for more specialized support, the deductible for those students will be waived. So I just want to make a note of that. So if your student says, oh, I went to health services, I wasn't feeling great, and they referred me to a cardiologist, or they referred me to get another X-ray or MRI or something like that, make sure that your student has their deductible waived, and either Lynn or I can talk through how that happens. It happens through student health insurance, through student health services, sorry, but is something that can save you a couple dollars. The other consortium resource that I want to talk about is MCAPS, which stands for Monsour Counseling and Psychological Services. And Monsour is also open Monday through Friday. They are housed in the same building as Student Health Services, and they offer a range of both counseling and therapy, as well as psychiatric support for our students. So what they do offer for students is they refer to it as brief individual counseling. So for a student who might be struggling with a situational challenge, maybe transition to school, maybe they're going through a breakup, maybe they're experiencing, a bout of anxiety or depression. If upon meeting with the student for the first time, the clinician says, okay, I think we could kind of work through this in the next 2 to 3 months or so, that student can be seen at Monsour for weekly or biweekly counseling. For students who might need longer term or more specialized support, Monsour will help them identify a clinician in the village of Claremont, that takes their insurance. They also provide psychiatric consultation and medication management. So if a student is coming to Claremont already on psychiatric medication, or if they are already here and are thinking that they might want to explore that, we have 3 part-time psychiatrists that are here on campus that are wonderful. If your student is coming into campus already on medication, I would highly encourage them to get set up with a psychiatrist here, especially if they're coming from out of state. Depending on the state that you're coming from, your student's clinician might not be able to see them regularly here, and certainly won't be able to see them in person regularly. So our psychiatrists here are available for that. MCAPS also provides general screenings for anxiety, depression, provides support for folks with learning disabilities and or ADHD. So they have a psychologist on staff who specializes in those areas. They offer groups and workshops. So they'll typically each semester do, an anxiety toolbox or depression toolbox, where they'll have a handful of sessions to kind of teach some skills around how to manage both of those things. They'll hold groups. Some in the past have been around healthy relationships, a men's group, women's group, grief group. So each semester they kind of refresh what they offer, but that's a really great way for students to not only get clinical support, but peer support. They also, as I mentioned earlier, will refer folks to community clinicians. So we have dozens and dozens of therapists here in really just the village of Claremont, and then certainly going outward. But there are plenty of clinicians that are in walking distance, which I know is really important for students. And so Monsour can help with that if needed. They are also available for crisis intervention, both during office hours and after hours, for students who might be in high levels of distress. And they'll also provide different campus outreach programs. Case management and health promotion at CMC is housed within the Dean of Students office. So just like Monsour will help students with referrals to off-campus supports, that's something that we do as well. So case management is really about supporting students individually with their unique needs. And it might mean sitting with someone for a little bit because they're having a really crummy day, all the way up to doing some, crisis intervention and ultimately connecting them to higher levels of support. We do a lot of partnering with our on-campus supports and resources. So case management might look like connecting students to a member of our academic success team for help with their academic and personal goals. We do educational programming, outreach and support, and various health and well-being topics. Again, referral to different resources, connections to social supports too. We see that particularly when students first arrive, if they have some difficulty kind of finding their place on campus, we'll certainly help them figure out the spaces on campus that might be best for them. For students who might go out on a medical leave of absence for any reason throughout their time here, while they're away, we stay in touch with them. And then as soon as they're back, we make sure that we help with that transition and continuity of care for when they return to Claremont. And some other resources that are housed here at CMC, the Romero Success Coaches, which your students will learn a ton about during new student orientation. They're a really phenomenal peer group here on campus. They're not like subject specific tutors, but they provide peer support for students who might be struggling with some of that academic transition that DT was talking about earlier. So, right, maybe figuring out how to use your unstructured time. So how to like chunk out, what to do on your Wednesdays when you have 5 hours with nothing to do. They might help you with overcoming procrastination, right? Which we see a lot of when there isn't a ton of structure. Test anxiety, when you've only got, 2 or 3 exams during the course of a year, they can be really stressful for students. And so talking through different tips and tricks, how to efficiently read, how to take notes, how to study essentially. So they're really wonderful for assisting with habit building. They also will touch on a variety of well-being topics, helping students develop, better sleep management, healthy habit building. 7C Health, which I mentioned earlier, is a virtual platform that is available for students 24/7. They can receive both physical and mental health care. So again, if health services is closed and a student wants to talk with a clinician over their video, they are able to access this free of charge. They may ultimately refer them somewhere, but it can be a really great way for someone to just get a little peace of mind in the interim until they're able to get in to see somebody. 7C Health also offers ongoing and scheduled counseling and psychiatry appointments. So for counseling, students are given 12 free teletherapy appointments over the course of an academic year. So that started August 1st and will run through July 31st. That's how 7C, the platform, defines their academic year. Hamilton Health Box is basically our COVID partner. They've been with us for the last couple of years, and they are available free of charge to assist students with any testing. And then if a student does test positive for COVID, Hamilton Health Box staff here on campus will help with the management of that. Supplemental counseling. So we work with a handful of therapists in the local village of Claremont who will come to campus and hold different drop-in hours. to kind of fill some of the gaps that the Monsour Counseling Center offers. So for example, we have therapists who come in and hold drop-in hours for our Black and Indigenous students of color, for our Chicano Latino students, our Asian Pacific Islander and Desi American students. So they have, folks that they can identify with that can talk through different mental health, supports. They also hold different groups. So one group that we'll be holding this year with one of our contracted clinicians is just kind of an open general process group. So students can show up to talk about, the transition to college, any general anxieties or challenges they may be having. So they've been really great partners for us. And then peer health educators, we are in the process of developing our inaugural team. And so what that will look like is a group of students who will be doing a lot of peer-to-peer health and wellness messaging through outreach, workshops, and trainings. We're really excited about that as well. I think it's
Great.
back
Thank
to
you.
DT to wrap us up.
Yep. All right, last slide, and then we're eager to answer all of your questions. So just wanted to give you a little bit of a sense in how you can be the most supportive in this transition. So one, do a lot more listening than talking. Remember that they often will call home when they're at their least happy, not their most happy. And any of you who've had students in college, I'm sure can attest to that now. Try to let them, sort of make their own decisions. So this is one of those moments where, you've selected this school because it's, in part at least, because it's a place where students can take some conscientious risks, make their own decisions. And if it doesn't work out, there's a whole group of us standing by, ready to pick them up and dust them off and get them back on the right path. So this is a really nice opportunity for them to make their own choices and for us to support them in managing, the contingencies of those choices. Help them think about the importance of relationships with faculty and staff, especially if they're a little less comfortable with that. So sometimes our students are coming from really big high schools or places where, kind of the authority of faculty and staff created a barrier to making, to building those relationships. We are going to coach our students during orientation on how to do that. So thinking about how to email, thinking about how to make the most of office hours when you go and want to speak with a faculty member about what's going on in class, helping to build relationships with the staff on our team. And we're going to coach them on that, but just remind them that we're all here to help them be successful. Reorienting achievement. So grades have been their kind of primary focus for a long time. And while grades matter to an extent, when you reach this level, it's really about getting that degree. So keep them focused on, a few academic stumbling blocks is not a deal breaker. Remind them of the resources and we'll kind of get them back on track. But B's and then C's, that kind of stuff, those need to not be reasons for a tailspin. So keep in good touch with them and us on that. Again, revisiting conversations about healthy decision making, reminding them that if they have any kind of pre-existing thing, many of our students will come to us having had IEPs in high school, for example. So we want them to touch base with us, connect with our accessibility services office or anybody on this call, and we can help make sure that they are in a position where they deeply understand their own circumstances and how to advocate and access the resources around them. FERPA is an important thing to understand, as well as HIPAA, and HIPAA is spelled wrong there, but FERPA is the legislation that limits the amount of access parents have to their students' educational records, which means if your student is 18, you will not, for example, receive their grades automatically. You will not hear from the registrar's office if they've dropped a class, for example. So if you want to have easy access to that information, it's important that your student signs a FERPA waiver, and those are available online. And if you do that, it's also important to remember that that doesn't make that information automatic. But it does mean if you reach out to the college seeking that information, the college can provide it. If you have any questions about FERPA, we're going to put our emails up here in a minute, and you can certainly reach out individually and we can get those answered. Similarly, HIPAA protects health records. And once your student is 18, you no longer have access to their general health records, nor do they need to seek your consent for various procedures and other things. So continue to talk to your students about just maintaining those open lines of communication so you're not in the dark on those things. While FERPA and HIPAA are really important, we also want you to understand that if we feel that your student is in danger, so if we have evidence of risk to self or others, we will reach out to you. We believe strongly that that's, we would rather take our chances with an angry student and make sure that a family is notified if we think things are imminently dangerous for them. So you can have at least some confidence of that. If your student has private insurance, please make sure they have their card and they know how to use it. And we will talk about the Live Safe app once they get to school, but that's a place where they can report concerns, they can get escorts, they can work with friends to kind of track where they're going and coming from. So it's just one more safety mechanism. And then consider sending them with some kind of health and wellness kit. So whatever over-the-counter medications they use, you might send them with, a heating pad or an ice pack or a thermometer, whatever it is that will make them feel the most confident when they get what will be inevitable, some kind of a flu or strep throat, or, they're living all together in these halls. So whatever makes them feel the most comfortable. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop talking. Our contact information is on the screen here, and we are happy to answer any questions, including around COVID management, if anybody's has specific questions about that. And Jeannie, maybe I'll let you run the Q&A because I'm not seeing the chat quite as easily.
Okay, so we did get quite a few questions. Lynn, though, has been answering those in the chat. So just to reiterate, if you don't see a ship premium charge on the student's account now, Lynn, that means correctly that has been waived, right? But there's still time to get that changed if you decide you do want to purchase that insurance.
That is correct, Jeannie. So if we sent lots of reminders, but students get overwhelmed with email. So if that charge is on the account, the drop dead date is actually September 13th. After that, we can't do anything, but they can go through their orientation portal. There's an item to go to the Gallagher Student Health Waiver portal, or they can go and look at one of those emails we sent and go into the portal and waive. And if you'd rather have, they did waive and you'd rather have them on the ship insurance, then we can make that happen as well. You can email me and we'll figure that out.
So there was some conversation, thank you, Lynn. There was some conversation about things that are free of charge at Student Health Services versus something that you might get billed for, and then you could submit that to your own private insurance. What are some examples of what might be free for a student to go in and do, and what you might have to pay for?
Yeah, some examples of that would be things like throat cultures for strep throat, basic flu tests. Those sorts of things are free, are all free. Something that would potentially have more of a charge would be like an x-ray service, for example, or stitches, that sort of thing. But they have that conversation with the student before that procedure happens, right? So that they're able to call home if they need to and just say, hey, this is what they're recommending. What do you think? And make sure that it's, something that everybody's comfortable with.
So
Also,
go ahead.
my understanding too, unless things have shifted, if you've heard anything, DT or Lynn, but appointments are for, like, to make an appointment and to walk in, like for a physical, something like that is free. A walk-in, I believe, costs $15, like if you do not make an appointment ahead of time.
So how necessary would you say, or what would that decision making be about whether or not you should try to set up a local doctor for your student, have one here, versus really just utilizing Student Health Services most of the time?
I recommend using Student Health Services. We think they're excellent. The director, Dr. Pratik Jindal, is amazing. He really understands the special dynamics of what college living looks like. And I think that's particularly important in managing student health. So while an external doctor will have lots and lots of good advice, of course, on any kind of illness, they may not be as intimately familiar with what the residential community here looks like. And I think that does shift how students manage their health. So I would recommend they start with student health services. It doesn't preclude them, by the way, from accessing external physicians.
And for any students who might be incoming with, either any chronic health conditions or ongoing health conditions, student health services can also help you identify referrals in the area. So if you did want to find somebody close by that could monitor, a longer standing health issue, SHS has tons of referrals for a variety of areas.
And I really do encourage you to, if with all these questions, check the website, the FAQs I put in the chat. I'll put it in again. They do answer all the questions that we're asking today. To Jess's point, if you schedule an appointment ahead of time to see the doctor or nurse practitioner, there's no charge. But if you do a walk-in without a scheduled visit, it's $15. So that and all these answers are on that page. I'm just looking through it now to make sure that most of them are on there.
Okay, so quick question. Oh, yes, it is. This will all be shared with the students during their orientation when they come next or in a couple of weeks. PT we have. Okay, physical therapy is part of this and is walking distance. Lots of the pharmacy one, there was one question about transferring prescriptions. Hendrix does just a huge amount, I think, of the students, because it is walking distance right there in the village. We definitely have Walgreens, CVS, all of those around, but most of those you would have to drive. So Hendrix is a pretty good option. If there is a question from an international family, it looks coming from England. How do we get a doctor? But is it the same as for domestic families for international? Start with student health services.
Yeah, start with student health services. And then because international students are on the student health insurance plan, Aetna is the name of the insurance provider. So if you needed a specialized physician or an additional opinion, then they would be referred out to an Aetna physician.
Okay. I think we've covered all of the questions on this topic. You wanted to move on.
Perfect. Why don't I provide just a brief overview of how we're managing COVID this year so people have a sense of that. Students have received this information. So we are encouraging but not requiring a negative test result before students come to campus. It's helpful if they've been exposed or have any symptoms to test before they show up, because they will be tested within 72 hours after arriving. And so if they're positive, it's sure nice to know that before they head to campus so they can be not in isolation housing when they get to campus. And if that's the case, we'll just work with them on an alternative move-in. We'll run orientation sessions virtually, all of those things. So it's not a panic situation, but just nice to know. Once students get here, they will go through the first day with all of you. And then after you head home, the students meet with their residence hall, their resident assistant. They have some sessions with us in the evening. And then in the morning, on Monday morning, they head off on their WO trips, their welcome orientation adventures. So they will be going either cabin camping or beach camping. And once they return from that trip is when they will do their COVID testing. So everybody will receive their test kit before they get off the bus. Then they have a certain period of time where they can complete that test. And after that, students can test voluntarily pretty much anytime they want. So the consortium will have within the next 2 weeks, vending machines that are set up. We are using a testing group called Shield T3. So these are saliva PCR tests. Shield T3 is out of University of Illinois, if you want to look them up and get a little more information. But we have a lab on campus for the 7 colleges. So Students can access a test anytime they need to from any of the vending machines on the campuses. There will be 7 of them, or 6 of them, I believe. And they just will have a little login information that they do on their phones. They'll scan that then when they drop their test into the receptacle, and then they receive their test results generally within about 6 to 12 hours. If a student is positive, then we have a whole system that goes into effect. So Sharon or I will reach out to the student after our Hamilton Health Box team has talked to them. So Marina Zanzarini is the head of Hamilton Health Box here, and she'll reach out to the student, let them, know that they're positive, that we're going to be in touch. She checks in with them on any of their health symptoms. So if they are, asymptomatic, or maybe they're struggling to breathe and have other things going on. So she initiates all of the medical care. And then Sharon and I get on the phone with the student and help coordinate their move to isolation housing. We have isolation housing just south of campus, so it's adjacent in, we have a number of homes where our faculty and staff live, and a group of those have been held out for isolation housing. We also have several apartments that are part of our Kendry apartment complex, about 1.5 miles away from campus, where there's additional isolation housing. If all of our isolation housing fills, then students will isolate on campus. So we have a few rooms that are empty where we'll be able to isolate students. If all of those fill, then we will isolate in place. We did reach that phase one time last year. We had a significant surge in, I think we were in April, Sharon, if I recall, where we did end up having to isolate some students in place. Regardless of where they're isolating, though, they're receiving ongoing support. So meals are delivered to them. They have snacks regularly, that their some food and water are amply handled. And we're able to meet all of their dietary restrictions and preferences in that process. They have daily check-ins with our medical team to make sure they're feeling okay. After 5 days in isolation, they are able to start testing with antigen tests. And once that antigen test comes back negative, they can be released from isolation. And we permit our students to test on, so that's day 6. If that day 6 test comes back positive, they can test again on day 7 until they are negative, or they've gone through the full 10 days of isolation to be back in the mix on campus. If a student is symptomatic and has a known exposure to a positive case, we are also able to give them what's called a Q test. It's a nucleic acid amplification test similar to PCR in terms of its accuracy. And we're able to do those on campus and return a result in about 30 minutes. So it's a much faster process. We like that because it allows us to stop the spread so much quicker. So if we have a student that we think is at a higher risk just given their exposure and that they're symptomatic, we're able to know that immediately and get them moved into housing without having to wait for that longer, 6 to 12 hours from the PCR test. Okay, any questions about any of that? We're obviously a couple years into this whole situation. This talk 2 years ago, there were a lot of questions about that. Okay. Perfect. So it's entirely likely that over the next couple of weeks, as you are really getting ready to send them off, that some new questions might emerge. Please don't hesitate to reach out to our office. We are partners with you in making sure that your students are able to get here and feel healthy and whole in every dimension. We take that framework really seriously. It's not just about the responsive elements of getting them care when they need it, but also the preventative elements of helping our students take ownership of their own well-being. And what does that mean? What does that look like? And helping coach them to that. So if there are things that are going to be problems for your student potentially, let us know ahead of time. There's all kinds of unobtrusive ways that we could be reaching out and hopefully heading some of this off before it becomes real problematic. I think I saw a question about restrictions on the campuses. Currently, no. So 5C dining, for example, is a go. So students can eat at any of the dining halls. There may be some social restrictions that campuses put into place for the first couple of weeks of the semester where they kind of limit, some of the bigger social gatherings and that kind of thing. I think that those will emerge over the next few weeks. We're really tracking LA County very carefully, and it looked like things were kind of headed up. We had a little bit of a spike, everything leveled out. We're in a much better place now than we were 2 weeks ago. So a lot of those sort of social restrictions will be game time decisions, but we will be communicating that out with our students regularly. And we're in very close communication with our student government, which is called ASCMC. And they're the ones that shoulder a lot of that responsibility for planning events and then making sure that our students are aware of any of the regulations or restrictions that come with them.
One question came in. Students who are unvaccinated, would they potentially have a roommate who is vaccinated?
That is possible, yes. But unvaccinated students may only remain so if they have a medical exemption or a certified religious exemption. And I will put the name of so the medical exemptions run through Student Health Services, and students were able to indicate that they're seeking a medical exemption on that form that they had to submit that had their vaccine info. So if they did not have a COVID vaccine for that reason, they indicate it there. And then it goes to an exemption committee that's comprised of 3 medical professionals. They review all of that information. They get in touch with the student to fully understand their situation. And then if warranted, they grant the exemption. If your student is seeking an exemption on the basis of a religious practice, you would email Neray Gray. Sharon, could you please pop that in the chat? Neray is our Chief Civil Rights Officer, and she can review that circumstance and then determine whether or not there is an exemption. Last year, just to give you a sense of our 1,400 students, we had 6 exemptions in total. So we're at a very, very, very high vaccination rate here. All right. We are really excited to see our students. We're totally ready for them. They should have all received now their housing and their roommate assignments on Friday. So there's lots of flying back and forth as people start getting in touch with each other and who's bringing what and all of that. The energy is really high. We've got them. So just remember, right, that anxiety of all of this is very, very normal. And if something happens where you're like, wow, this feels like we're going way beyond what would be kind of a typical response, reach out to us. There's so many ways that we can help your student feel more comfortable, and have them remembering to answer the phone from 909 area codes, because our staff is out there trying to get in touch with everybody and check in and just make sure they feel great before they head to campus. So. All right.
Well, thank you everyone from the Dean of Students Office, DOS, for this time today. Very, very valuable. I'm sure everyone's feeling a little better with all the information. It calms us down just a little bit. So our next session together, I'm going to put that in the chat so you can see the schedule, is tomorrow, August 9th. That's at 3:30 Pacific time. And that will be with Elizabeth Morgan, our registrar, to talk about academics and what it takes, what your students will need to do to complete their degree here at CMC. So hopefully we'll see you all there. And also, you can always send any questions that come up after you kind of digest this a little bit and you think, I forgot to ask that. You can email any of the people here. I will also put my name and my email. Usually at CMC, if you need to email someone, it's the first letter of their first name, then their last name at cmc.edu. So you can usually find us that way.
Question if the slides are available.
So we recorded the presentation and we can certainly share the presentation with anybody who wants it. So just email Jeannie and she can get you that link. And then we can talk, Jeannie, if you want to post it somewhere, we can talk about it.
Yeah, we might post it on the website. So we'll see about doing that too. Okay, well, thank you, everyone.
See you soon.
Have a great day.
Take care.
Welcome to CMC.
Yes.